This is Real Conversations with Anita, a mental health podcast brought to you by Iltizam by Ikunas and MIASA Malaysia. Assalamualaikum and a very good evening, everyone. Welcome to Real Conversations with Anita. Before we proceed to this week's session, I would like to acknowledge two individuals who have passed but touched our lives. And the first one being Arwah Kamarul Azhar bin Mat, or fondly known as Haji Bo, who passed in 2021 due to COVID. He is the person responsible helping us and advising MIASA, especially in the setting up of our podcast studio back then. And we would like to dedicate this podcast in remembrance of him. Jadi sama-sama kita sedekahkan surah Al-Fatihah buat arwah Haji Bu, insyaAllah. Auzubillahi minasyaitanirrajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin arrahmanirrahim maliki yaumiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Now, there is also an extraordinary individual who passed recently, the late Senator Montian Buntan, and I would like to quote from UNWA's words. He was a titan in the struggle for human rights, and his famous saying of "I've given up in giving up." He was born blind but had a clearer vision than most. He did not need a light to find his way in the dark. Many of us turn to Montian to guide us through the dark, troubling landscape of the struggle for disability justice. It is indeed a great loss for the disability space with the loss of Senator Montian Buntan. And recently I wrote in his e-memorial book, which I would like to share here today with everyone. Senator Montian, my last message to you was on the 1st of February 2024. I had wondered why you didn't reply, as you were always prompt in responding, despite your many commitments and tight schedule. I was excited to witness your sharing once again in Malaysia this November 2024 at the forthcoming International Stigma Conference that MIASA is organizing, and then I found about your passing. Senator Montian, you are such an inspiration for many, and we hope to carry on your legacy in all areas of disability rights. It saddens all of us to see such a wonderful person as you go, but we assure you that your efforts will not have been in vain. Thank you for your contributions and for everything you stood for. Rest well now, my dear friend. Thank you very much, everyone. Assalamualaikum and a very good evening, everyone. We meet again on Real Conversations with Anita, a mental health podcast brought to you by Iltizam by Ikunas and MIASA Malaysia. And today, once again, we will be unpacking taboos surrounding mental health. But this week, we will also be learning on rare diseases or rare disorders. And we are truly happy and thrilled and excited to have with us today Puan Nadiah Hanim Abdul Latif, the president of the Malaysian Rare Disorders Society, and she's also the regional representative for Southeast Asia, Oman, Qatar, Jordan, UAE, and South Korea for the Phelan-McDermott Syndrome Foundation, and many more. And today's topic is entitled A Conversation on Rare Diseases from the Lens of a Caregiver and Advocate. So thank you so much, Puan Nadiah, for being with us today. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, really good. I think
Alhamdulillah.
since we last met, there has been many things that have taken place. So really happy to be here.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, I know you're always so busy doing lots of stuff.
We're tandeming.
Looking at your profile, I don't know where it begins and where it ends. There's so much here, but we will be talking about that as well. So before we dive into this discussion, maybe you want to introduce to our listeners and followers, what do you do? And is there anything new happening as of recent?
Sure. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being here.
So, my name is Nadia. I'm actually with the Malaysian Rare Disorders Society in Malaysia.
Yep.
But I also carry a regional role, which is with the Phelan-McDermott Syndrome Foundation. And as with most of us in Malaysia, I think we have professionals who do different things in their professional career, but their passion is also in many other pots. So you and I share a lot of similarities there.
We do.
As a career, my background is actually in sustainability and social impact. And I'm also a child rights advocate and child protector and courts advisor. But, as a caregiver, and this was really, born out of a lot of love and learning from a lot of other caregivers and families in Malaysia, this journey on rare disease was really because we found that it was an extreme unmet need,
Betul.
At least in Malaysia and this region. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. So what are you doing right now? I mean, any new projects, initiatives?
A lot. So number one, really happy to share that Alhamdulillah 2024 is actually a leap year, kan? So
Betul,
as you know, Anita,
Betul.
last year when we spoke, I told you that the last day of February each year is World Rare Disease Day. Now, the special thing about this year is because it is a leap year, jadi hari yang jarang-jarang jumpa, we get an extra day more than any other year. So this year has been super special for us. We have been on this advocacy journey, and MRDS was established 20 years ago this year through the amazing work of Datuk Hatijah, Prof. Tong, and the genetic pediatric unit dekat PPUM. So since then, this year, the focus was really on connecting the dots. Alhamdulillah, in the last 12 months, we have seen a lot of new movement. We've seen new patient groups forming. We have seen the ones that are already established becoming even more established. In November last year, Malaysia, through MIDS, played co-host. For the first time, Malaysia played co-host for the Asia Pacific Alliance for Rare Disease Organization conference, which saw leaderships from 13 different countries convene in Malaysia, representing over 35 different rare disease organizations, and it included policymakers like people from Ministry of Health. It included think tanks, academia, allied health, healthcare professionals, nurses, doctors, parents, patients, the media, pharma, corporates, and that was really a meeting of minds. Because what we wanted to do for that particular session was we wanted to break this barrier of, usually if you have a medical conference, it's the doctors that attend. Patients tak ada dekat situ kan. Sama macam issue mental health.
Betul, same thing.
So we decided, look, if you're going to be talking about us, we want to be there and be part of the
Nothing
conversation.
about us without us.
Exactly. So we had our youth front and center. That was amazing. From our MC to our moderators, facilitators, opening gambit, they were actually youth with rare disease, and this allowed for the professionals and the policymakers to see firsthand, begini rupanya beragam kita, you know. So since then, Alhamdulillah, the commitment from the Ministry of Health has kind of like taken an uptake. In fact, I'm going to have a meeting with KKM after this.
Oh, mashallah.
And the most exciting thing I have to share, I suppose, is the explicit commitment they made then, which they are keeping to their word right now, is in the next 12 months or so, we will see, inshallah doakan, Malaysia will be having its national policy in rare disease.
Subhanallah.
Yes, after many years of pushing, and it wasn't, it didn't start with us alone. So that itself was goosebumps. We're now part of the National Committee for Rare Disease, so we're not only talking about the policy, but we're also talking about many other things, because a lot of people assume if you have a rare disease, you are anak kepada Ministry of Health.
Betul.
But we only have, so much of rare diseases that have treatable or medical interventions. Most of the time, other issues like inclusive education, caregiver support,
Betul.
mental health and sexual reproductive health, workplace policies or work with dignity, semua ni macam tercicir, right?
Betul.
So it's great that in the next few months, we will be connecting the dots. We already have one leg in together with Kementerian Belia dan Sukan. We actually have para-athletes who are representing Malaysia from the rare disease community. Not by us, because diorang memang bagus lah. It's them, not us.
Alhamdulillah.
And so yeah, we're seeing quite a lot of movement. So in the next 12 months, really happy to berdamping dengan MIASA, because we will be contacting you for other things as well.
Alhamdulillah. I was just going to ask what's the outcome from the conference itself, tapi now we know.
Yes.
MashaAllah. So in the next 12 months, so this year, 2024.
Yes, the aim is December 2024.
Good job, guys. Good job, everyone.
Thank you.
Subhanallah, alhamdulillah. Okay, so that's a lot. So that's a lot of projects, developments, especially within the space. Alhamdulillah, very happy to hear that. Now, Nadia, of course, we've known each other for a bit, and, I know a bit about,
from
a
the
lot.
different hat, right?
Yeah, from the different things that both of us, gone through, our experiences within corporate, alhamdulillah, and then of course within the impact space. Tapi we want to learn a little bit about you as a person, right? Okay, tell me a little bit about your childhood.
My childhood?
Your childhood.
Okay. really blessed because saya ni angkatan anak-anak yang membesar di rumah kerajaan.
Oh,
so
mashallah.
my mother was a civil servant. She was working at that point in time. Well, my earliest memory was when she was working with Hospital Tengku Ampuan Rahimah in Klang.
Oh, Klang.
So we grew up in Jalan Pegawai dekat rumah kerajaan tu, and it was a totally different childhood. I mean, nobody had cell phones.
Betul.
The worst thing that could happen to you was kena kejar angsa rumah nyonya sebelah, and it was really a majmuk area. So
How many siblings?
I have 3.
3. Okay, and you are
the first, the
oh,
eldest.
sulung. Okay.
Yeah. So my upbringing was a lot to do with outdoors, a lot to do with meeting people, a lot to do with not knowing the differences between races. As it's not an issue. Everybody was just like that because everybody was together, right? And then after a few years, we moved to Subang, and that was a different sort of setup, but very much still multiracial. So I think my upbringing and my growing has always been everyone has their place and is important in society, and we've never had this in our family. We've never been taught they're different, therefore,
right?
So that's why if you look at us now, all 3 of us, seorang kahwin Cina, seorang kahwin Melayu, seorang kahwin Cina, seorang kahwin Arab, seorang kahwin India. So it's literally our satu Malaysia,
masyarakat majmuk dulu kan
so
kita panggil.
Every possible perayaan we're there,
right.
So yeah.
Wow, mashallah, alhamdulillah. So what do you think in terms of what was memorable when you were, growing up, and maybe what were some challenges maybe that you faced?
Growing up, I think in terms of challenges, I don't think I've ever had any sort of insurmountable challenges.
Okay.
Majority of the challenges that I would have faced would have been like any other child growing up in the 80s. I think more often than not, if I were to reflect back, children today have got more, I don't know, it's more subversive kind of challenges that they're facing now. For us, if you had a cut or a bruise or someone were to be bullying you in school, sorry, excuse me, it would really be things that are not necessarily out of the norm then. But now, if somebody doesn't like you and they troll you, or it goes online, or you're unfriended, or the cancel culture is totally different now.
Right.
So comparing my childhood to where things are right now, I think it's a very different space. So I wouldn't be able to say that I've had any trauma necessarily growing up, because looking at what the families that I work with now and the children that I work with now,
right.
And the kind of difficulties that they are going through, it's a lot more complex. I think because of the fact that there are a lot more dimensions, and your problems don't just stay with you nowadays, especially if it's something that you've posted online. They kind of follow you around forever and ever, It's not the same as dulu. Okay, dah halas, finish. Okay, moving on.
All done.
It's the next issue. Yeah.
But the thing is, you do so much, right? And you not only do so much, you've got a lot on your plate. And so I was just wondering, maybe there are some experiences that shaped you to who you are today, though, Nadiah? Because you seem always very energetic, positive.
Not always.
Always when I see you.
Bila kita jumpa
Sebab jarang jumpa.
Kita jarang jumpa.
Okay, so maybe what do you remember?
One particular growing up memory that I look to fondly, really, was when my mother was working in the hospital then. If we finished school early, sometimes kita bertinggik lah dekat situ, ataupun occasionally she would bring us to the hospital.
Betul.
And she would also be in charge of dental A&E. So we would see all sorts of trauma cases going in and out, and people diusung, and I think at a young age I was exposed to at least the sight of trauma, not necessarily trauma yang sangat teruk lah, but it became something that I wasn't necessarily afraid of, but I was intrigued, right? I was like, what's going on? There's so much pain going around. So by the time I was in secondary school, it was quite it was almost like a done thing. So almost everybody was in Leo, Interact, or Scouts, or Girl Guides and things like that, right? Yeah. So I was
brownies.
Brownies, right? Depending on which school you're, Putri Islam, depending on which club you're in. So I was already very much into, for example, the orphanages or the old folks home, and that would be what I was doing.
Secondary school.
Daripada 12, 13, it was dah memang terjerumus. I mean, looking back and I'm thinking about it, I must have been quite a strange kid. But when I was then it was just out of love, it was out of curiosity and love, and that was it. I saw them as my friend. I do tuition classes and things like that, and I would have never thought it was that different.
Betul.
Right? And then at about 16, when you start having to choose what stream you want, right? So I had asked my mom, is it okay if I do an internship at the hospital? Because at that point, she was the departmental head dekat Hospital Kuala Lumpur. And I said, can I do an attachment in Hospital Kuala Lumpur? She said, sure. What department are you looking at? And I said, psychiatry and psychology. She looked at me like, okay, all right, this is interesting. So she got me through. And for that few weeks that I was actually at HKL, I actually did my ward rounds together with the doctors, the psychiatric ward and all that. So because I think at that point, in my teenagehood, I was already considering doing forensic psychology. Which was terkubur niat lepas tu, but that's a different story for another day. But in that, I saw firsthand a lot of people who are going through a lot of unseen trauma. You probably don't know their stories, but you know that they're going through something deep, and they were kind of, you know. And I remember the first few days when I was going in, the doctor of the lab coat saying, "Doktor baru ke?" Because I could tell, my goodness, tak cukup doctor in the psychiatric ward, because they were just very happy to see you, right? I was like, no, I'm so totally unqualified. I'm just here to shadow, right?
Right.
But I think that was probably some of the more nuanced moments in my growing up, realizing that while we see things on the surface that, you know, society seems good, everybody's smiling, everything's okay, there are many other layers of things that are not necessarily as okay, but we don't talk about it much, right? I mean, if you're seeing someone chained to the bed because you don't want them to hurt themselves, kita masa tu mana nak tahu, like, the only question I had was, why is she chained to the bed, right? And masa tu Missy tu kata, we are trying to prevent her from hurting herself. Said, has she tried that before? I said, yeah, prior to that, she was trying to jump out of the hospital window. So, right, okay. But that was probably Allah bagi teaser je lah. You know, we don't necessarily know where this is heading, but that was kind of little precursors to having a larger interest later on. So that then snowballed into everything else that we're at right now.
Alhamdulillah. It's interesting that you said what you just said, because when was this? This was 20 years ago? More than that?
Belasan tahun lah, more than that.
More than that kan, dah lama kan. Not revealing your age, of course.
Oh, okay, very happy. Alhamdulillah for the years that we have.
Alhamdulillah, betul. No, because, it's interesting when you said, even during the time that you saw people being chained, ataupun ikat ke, to the bed, etc. Because this is one of the sides of psychiatry that we don't talk enough about.
Yes.
And being MIASA, we advocate for zero coercion, definitely. So as much as possible, we want to end this inhumane practices and treatments from happening. And because of that, we are also, this will lead up to our conference this November. Alhamdulillah. So we're doing the International Stigma Conference. So and we will have awesome international speakers that will be specifically talking about this topic on deinstitutionalization. So hopefully it'll open up eyes. And
do you have spots for RD patients to come and join you?
Of course,
okay,
we
great.
do.
So we're signing up.
Please join us November 23rd and 24th.
You know what's funny?
Inshallah.
24th, 25th, 26th was our Apardo conference last year. So
memang full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
Inshallah, alhamdulillah. Okay, Nadia, thank you so much for sharing that. Now, we want to go a little bit about your role as the president of the Malaysian Red Disorders Society, MRDS, and also as the regional rep for the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation. Okay, so based on my very limited knowledge and also based on my readings and what I've heard, okay, one is on rare diseases. Maybe you want to touch a little bit about that. I do feel that the literacy on this has increased awareness, especially, and like what you said, through, everyone's hard work on advocacy, we see things have changed and progressed, hopefully transformed. And this is what we're really hoping, alhamdulillah. On Phelan-McDermid syndrome, specifically, as a rare genetic disorder, and I just found out is one of the most common causes to the autism spectrum disease. So I would like for you to share a little bit on this, because autism isn't rare.
Yes.
But Phelan-McDermid syndrome is.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about this so that we can understand, because I read that it leads to kids having language impairments, motor skills impairments as well, and then gastrointestinal problems, epilepsy, so on and so forth.
A whole list of things.
A whole list of things. Yeah. Okay, so educate us.
Okay, so maybe I start with rare disease first.
Boleh.
So in Malaysia, we call it penyakit jarang jumpa.
Betul.
And this is also thanks to Prof. Tong, who did the application to Dewan Bahasa dan Pustaka. In Indonesia, we call it penyakit langka.
Yes,
So
I remember.
recently we had this debate over do we want to revert to penyakit langka or do we want to call it penyakit jarang jumpa. But because it's now tied to so many things from research to SOP papers and all that, they decided, okay, let's just stick to penyakit jarang jumpa. Now, Malaysia doesn't necessarily have an official definition of what is penyakit jarang jumpa. So we have followed the World Health Organization punya ratio of one live birth in every 4,000.
Okay.
So 1 in 4,000 ratio. Tetapi, there are now approximately 7,000 plus known rare diseases or rare disorders in the world.
Okay.
Right?
Which falls under the 1 in 4,000?
No. So,
Okay.
the ratio that kita ambil in general is 1 in 4,000. Tetapi, all of these different conditions, mungkin ada satu dalam sejuta, ada yang satu dalam 10,000.
Okay, got
so the condition for Phelan-McDermid at one point in Malaysia was like 1 in 3.5 million.
Right.
So it was ultra rare at one point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the 7,000 different rare diseases that are there, out of that, 95 to about 97% do not have a medical treatment or a medical intervention. It tends to be lifelong. 70% of that tend to be genetic in nature. But the big important thing that a lot of people tak tahu is because of the name penyakit kan, we have this jaundiced perception that menular, right?
Betul.
Penyakit jarang jumpa tak berjangkit.
Betul.
So if hypothetically, if I did have a rare disease, which I don't, but if I did, you sitting beside me will not do anything to you.
Right.
So it's not because of COVID. It's not because saka or mak salah makan or STD. We get a lot of that. So none of that, right? So sometimes it is a situation where the parents may carry a genetic mutation or there was a genetic translocation. That means terlebih terkurang. Sama macam Downs pun ada terlebih terkurang kan?
Betul.
But there are many types of rare diseases that are actually also de novo. That means Tuhan nak jadikan, maka terjadilah.
Betul.
You know,
it's like mental health.
Correct. It got deleted, not because it was anyone's fault.
Betul.
Right? And that's what we wanted to highlight to people because majority of the situation is memang it was not salah siapa.
Betul.
It's more of why
Kun
not me.
Betul.
Right?
Betul.
Why not me instead of why me. Right? So with that, we have about now 5 to about 7% of those that have medical interventions or medical treatments.
Okay.
And these are known as orphan drugs. It's called orphan because it's not commercially viable to produce it in mass. So it's not like your COVID vaccine. Macam tu kan? So with that, the price tag to this tends to be extremely hefty, right? And something that the government is trying hard to support, but is not going to be able to support for everybody.
Betul.
So they have to look at unmet needs. They have to look at different criteria of assessment and affordability and applicability and availability, etc. So dalam 7,000 jenis ni, ada yang neuromuscular, ada yang degenerative, ada yang happen in adulthood.
Right.
So a lot of people assume that penyakit jarang jumpa ni only happens in babies or dalam perut rahim. It's not true because we do have rare diseases that only manifest late onset lah. Dia hanya ketara when you are older.
Adult, right.
Yeah. So I think it's good to know that there are people among us in society that might be at your workplace, that might be in your family that actually do have a rare disease. Tapi jangka hayat dia sama macam orang lain. Tak ada beza pun. It's just that maybe they have other complicated medical needs or sometimes they lack an organ. Benda dari luar tak nampak kan. So you think that they're complete. So Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation ataupun PMS, we like to call it Phelan-McDermid Syndrome ni. For short, we say PMS, and I like to say PMS, but it's not what you think, not the PMS that you think, right? It's actually originally called 22q13 deletion, which sounded like R2D2 sikit kan, once a Star Wars. But thanks to the researchers and geneticists that found the disease, so they named it after themselves. So with Katie Phelan and Helen McDermid, tu jadinya Phelan McDermid, nama dia orang lah, right? Faham. Now, there's still a lot to understand because it's kind of like a spectrum. So, around the world, the majority of the patients that are right now diagnosed with PMS is in the US, mainly because the amount of advocacy, the amount of awareness and research that's being pumped in there is the most, right? So, when I first got to know about this condition, sometime, maybe 14 years ago now, dah 10 tahun lebih dah. At that point in time, there was nobody else in Malaysia or Southeast Asia with that condition.
Right.
So when we spoke to the geneticist, he said, look, this is what it is, and was reading it from a printed Wikipedia-ish kind of paper and said, you pandai, you baca lah lebih. I was like, oh, bedside manners kosong. But okay. All right, I get it. And in searching about what PMS really was, what was the condition about, sometimes the challenge with Dr. Google is the more you tanya, the lagi all the bad news comes out, right? So you realize actually ada challenges with organ function, mental impediments, speech, hypotonia, lymphedema, ada yang bersabit dengan neurofibromatosis, so the body ends up developing tumor. So a lot of different complications, right? Then from there, I got hold of the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation and we realized sebenarnya tak ada dekat Malaysia. It was in the US.
I see.
So after talking to them for a few weeks, they said, hey, are you interested in, I suppose, starting a regional chapter here? Mainly because there isn't anyone here and I'm sure the condition bukan tak ada, but it's terribly underdiagnosed.
Right.
Yeah. So I had a conversation with my husband and I said, okay lah, this is one of those things yang kalau you start, you tak boleh reverse kan? It's like if you start, it's a lifelong commitment. So we said, okay, let's do it. And one country led to 2 countries, then became Southeast Asia,
right? And
then became Oman, Qatar, South Korea, all that. So baru minggu lepas, we launched the patient support group for the Arabic-speaking countries.
MashaAllah, alhamdulillah, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a lot.
Yes, but it was because, US itself is such a big geography, so they are broken into regions.
Betul.
And at that point in time, because there was literally nobody in Malaysia or Singapore, and the closest was New Zealand, Australia, they said, would you like to cover the region? I said, okay, if this means I will find other people. And really the basic of that, Anita, I just didn't want other people to feel alone and lost.
Betul, faham ni.
Sebab kita tahu kan, rasanya kita tak nak orang lain rasa the same thing. We were like, okay, let's do this. Tapi lepas tu tak boleh stop lah.
Betul lah. So you're doing advocacy on that? And also forming the peer groups.
We have patient support groups.
Okay.
The organization is really good in having, we have siblings group, we have mothers group, fathers group, patient support group. We now have school kids, how to engage school children. And then we have different sort of focus areas. Macam the research cluster area in seizures, mental development. And then another one on, say, the one that I love, one of my most favorite clusters, and I got training for that, was they had a caregiver, trauma, and support punya team.
I see.
So how do you help families in receiving the diagnosis and understanding bad news? And how do you actually then handle caregiver trauma? And then they also had sessions on vicarious trauma, right? You might be watching somebody else and you put tempias sekali.
Betul.
And then now, alhamdulillah, they have started doing testing on a potential trial drug. We have a pharmaceutical that's in the US that's currently looking at that to potentially see if this is going to be something that we can test on individuals with PMS in future.
Okay. But then I was just wondering, so the support groups, Nadia, the reason why it's all very segregated, not together, is there a reason for it?
It's together. So the main
like you
one
said,
is
patients group, and then you have the siblings group, and then you have the family group.
The main one is together.
Together, okay.
But usually, so for example, in June, July, we usually have the international conference.
Right.
So the main plenary, katalah, if it's going to be something that's a 3-4 day thing, the beginning session is always on welcoming new families, because it will be something that maybe for you dah 10 tahun, you dah tahulah information dia. Tapi for those that have never heard about it before, so we cluster that. And then the second and the third usually tends to be everything on care, treatment, discussions on upcoming research. So we have got the medical team that's discussing. We have the allied health team that's discussing. But at the same time, we know that some parents don't really want to know the science. They want to know, support me, I'm struggling. I want to know what's happening. So kita ada macam sesi pecahan. So while the plenary is happening, there will be another day that's dedicated only to families.
Okay, got it.
And we have sessions only for moms and only for dads and only for siblings, because we want to create that safe space where they're able to talk and not have to worry about my husband's here listening to what I'm saying, or mom would think that I'm not grateful. So they have
separate ones, okay,
separate sessions,
so that they feel safer in sharing certain things.
But induknya is together masih.
Betul. Okay. All right. Okay, Nadia, I think we've said a lot. So we are going to take a short break.
Sure.
And come back in the second segment on Real Conversations with Anita. Nadia, so you spoke a lot about your role, being the president, and your role with PMS. But maybe we want to touch a little bit about you as your role as a caregiver. So I know that someone in your family is also, living with a rare disease. Maybe you want to share a little bit about that, and how are you supporting this individual? Yep.
So sambungan dia, it's similar to, I guess it's a continuation of what I shared with you earlier. So when my eldest, my daughter, was first born, she was puretypical like anyone else. So we didn't, I suppose, anticipate, or we didn't suspect anything was amiss, right? But within the first year of her life, it was obvious that something wasn't going right. And as any new parent, we went through the whole list of meeting different doctors and allied health practitioners. We met pediatricians from Malaysia and abroad. Every time we heard someone was coming who was a neuropediatrician or an expert in something, we went. So this was like a multi-year journey. It wasn't even a multi-month, it was a multi-year journey. On the
what was off? Like you mentioned that
she started to miss her milestones, and then she started to regress. So for example, as a baby, she started babbling, and then she stopped, and then she never gained it back. Sampai hari ni, right? And then there were other things that you could tell. Dia macam naik, lepas tu dia turun. Dia naik. So there was something off lah, right? Then this was basically a 4.5-year journey of trying to find out apa sebenarnya, right? And I noticed that in Malaysia, when we don't know what it is, the doctors will basically say global developmental delay. GDD ni is like the umbrella of, we're not quite sure what it is, but it looks like this, right? Bless my neuropediatrician. She knew that by looking at my daughter, she said, okay, look, it looks like autism, but it's not autism. There's something else going on here. So I can either say that this is just like symptomatic and then just plaster it that, or let's go look for the root cause, because I think there's something else that's going on here that's not that, right? So most individuals with PMS will display some autistic traits, and some of them will have a dual diagnosis. It's quite common actually for individuals with rare disease to have more than one diagnosis.
Betul.
So contoh, kalau you have autism, you can have autism and ADHD, right? So the same thing, you might have a rare disease and a learning difficulty, or a rare disease and another rare disease and a learning difficulty. So it's quite for us, it's a norm to have benda yang berangkai lah.
Betul lah.
So after about 4.5 years or so, one day when we were going for our checkup with the pediatrician, she said, hey, you know what? There's this study that's being done in the US. Would you be interested to send your bio samples? Because I just spoke to this other specialist who's a geneticist, and he's doing this thing. Do you want to get on it, right? Sebab masa tu, we didn't have macam paid genetic services or at least subsidized genetic services, because we were at that point in private, because I was working in private sector, right? Tak sama macam kalau dekat hospital kerajaan and all that, and any kind of genetic testing would have been a few months punya salary, right? So we thought, okay, let's do this. Kita congak-congak, okay, we can do this. Let's try, right? Because at that point in time, as a family, we were already, I use this word very carefully, because the word reda does not mean accept and give up. It was, the label doesn't matter to me. I will care for this child forever and ever, and I will find every single way to help her thrive, right? But it's just that the fact that it is ABC ni dah tak penting lah, not as penting as it was when we were in the beginning of the journey, right? But we said, hey, if this is going to help us find out if there is something else that we're missing out, something else that we can do to help her, then let's do this, right? So, okay, pool resources and funds, and then spoke to the doctor and said, okay, we're in. Let's go for this, right? So we sent our bio samples, and then waited for a few weeks, which led to about a month or so, and then the results came. That was when the doctor printed it out on like a Wikipedia thing, so dia pun tak ada patient yang macam tu. So I was like, okay, this helps. So dia kata, okay, your child has 1, 2, 3 macam ni, baca, literally baca. So that led to us looking for other families that are like that in Malaysia. And at that point in time, we didn't know that PMS is actually a rare disease. So, for example, if someone tells you, okay, your child has COVID, you takkan, apakah itu COVID? You know, like, okay, how do I solve this? You know, you don't say, if Phelan-McDermid syndrome is a rare disease, you're not going to Google what is a rare disease. You focus on pertama dulu lah, right? So in that process and journey of trying to find out what it was, then I came about, Phelan-McDermid syndrome is a rare disease, and I was like, what's a rare disease? Terfikir lah. Okay, next round of checking, right? Then turns out that by this search, I was already with the Phelan-McDermid syndrome foundation. I was already with them beberapa bulan lah. I have already sort of started the journey there. I spoke to the doctors there, dah on the way, right? And then I found out that there was this thing called the Malaysian Rare Disorder Society. Baru found out, right? Because kita tak Google rare disease kan. So when that happened, I was like, oh, okay. there must be a community here.
Right.
If I am trying to look for a PMS family, this might be the way. Macam tu je lah, terdetik macam tu je.
Okay,
and I remembered vividly, it was at home thinking, let's try this route, right? Then it turns out that rupanya bukan ada satu je, ada 7,000. That was when it was like Allah bukakan hijab kan.
Betul.
So, wow, banyaknya.
Betul.
You know? And it was, to me, it wasn't overwhelming, but I think this was the drawing back on your experience when you were a kid,
Betul.
right? It became fascinating. I was like, this is so humbling and so fascinating at the same time, that there are so many others there, you know. And because it was like macam ni lah, you're the group of misfits, right? You don't really fit anywhere, so kita combine you semua jadi satu group macam tu lah. But when I first wrote to them, I said, hey, I'm looking for other PMS families. Itu je tujuannya. Tak ada plan apa-apa nak jadi AJK Exco pun. Nak cari keluarga lain PMS, right?
Betul lah.
And then the lovely lady who wrote back to me said, I'm sorry, we don't have any other PMS families. So, confirm lah masa tu memang kita in the island of no man's land, right? But we said, okay, no harm done. She said, why not come? The next few days, we're going to be having an AGM. Why not come and, join us so you can see other families? So that was really how one thing led to another. The next thing I became AGK. The next thing I became VP. And then I'm the president. But it wasn't by design. It was more like,
it is. It was by design. By design.
Not my design. Not my design. It was Allah's design. For sure. 100% Allah's design.
Yes, Allah's design.
But to your question on care. So, dekat Malaysia, and I think all across the world, because PMS doesn't have a cure, so it's incurable right now, right? So caregiving to a child or an adult or an individual with PMS is a lot to do with ensuring that they have the best quality of life. Because there are days that they are better, and then there are days that they have more medical needs. So dia naik turun lah, you know. So it can be anything from, on a good day, it can be anything from therapy like OT or speech or hippotherapy or hydro and things like that. On a bad day, it can mean hospitalization, because even the way they react to standard medication might not be the same as others.
Okay. Tapi are they verbal or could be both?
So the majority of PMS individuals are non-verbal.
Non-verbal, okay.
With the exception of a small number that do speak but tends to be echolalia. So it's not really conversational lah. It's more like autism punya kind of speech. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So how old is your daughter now and how is she doing?
Alhamdulillah, she is now 18 this year.
MashaAllah.
Yeah, it's been a journey, mashallah.
Such a long journey, mashallah.
At the moment, she's not too well. Tapi doakan, inshallah, she will be better soon. A lot of focus is still very much on early intervention and newborn screening and diagnosis for semua jenis OKU, right? Semua jenis disabilities, right? So because of that, if you look at the types of assistance that are available, if you are a child under the age of 4, generally it's about therapies and rehab for motor skills and things like that. And then bila you masuk preschool to sekolah rendah, you tend to be classified as, if you can join, if you have sort of the mental faculty to be able to join aliran perdana ataupun aliran khas ataupun aliran integrasi, you go into this three cabang. Right. And even then, for other rare diseases patients that I'm seeing here in the family, when I say family, it's actually the MRDS family. It can be as simple as the child is actually able to join and participate in normal classes, tapi sebab tak ada RAM, tak ada guru khas, and the school maybe doesn't want to take the liability, so budak tu belajar kat rumah. Right? So in the case
inclusive
of,
lah.
Yes, correct. So in the case of children with PMS, a lot of those yang ada, number one, several comorbidities. Number two, not able to care for themselves or take instructions in class. Or number three, not able to participate in activities like other people. You find that the majority of the early intervention or the special eds program tu end pretty much before Stand 1. Paling pun selebihnya tu, a lot of them get homeschooled, which is what ended up happening with her. A lot of activities were basically tailor-made, but really, really, really poor in terms of bridging from teenagehood to adolescence. So those that can will go into things like vocational skills, maybe will go to bake cakes or do things. Those that can go into employment will do that. But the majority of those that need a lot of care, there isn't actually a space for them. So that's one of the things that we're still very much struggling with in Malaysia, because I think the burden of care is not only with the families themselves, but it's atas dasar creativity dan kemampuan masing-masing lah. It's not menyeluruh. Because what I would like to see eventually is an institutionalized system where it really doesn't matter what your condition is, as long as you can blink, or even if you can't blink. So in this amazing school that I went to visit abroad, the child is just terlantar dengan wire, dengan drip semua tu, masih kat dalam kelas.
Subhanallah.
Datang naik stretcher hospital tu.
Betul. It's different lah, babe. I mean, the inclusivity part of it tu kan.
And right in front of the school, it says, we uphold the resolution on the rights of the child. We believe that every child has the right and the opportunity to participate. And
of course, it's the right of everyone.
Yeah.
The right to live is the right for everyone.
And the best thing is, sekolah ni free, dibayar kerajaan.
Subhanallah. Okay.
So we do. Wish list.
Wish list, yes. Okay. All right, Nadia, no. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I mean, it's a lot. Tapi you as a caregiver yourself, kan? And all other caregivers really, first of all, thank you so much for doing what you do. I think, it's so honorable. And I just wanted to also take care of you in the sense where, how are you balancing sebenarnya, Nadia, as a caregiver with all these different roles? Yeah. And then you have a child who also has a rare disease.
Yeah.
How does that look like for you?
The short answer is it's like a whirlwind
every
other day. I mean, I'm not going to lie.
And what does a bad day look like for you? Okay, maybe that's...
I think a bad day is not so much of a bad day for me, but more of a bad day when those that I'm caregiving are actually ill or in a crisis, and we don't know what's wrong, right? Because we have to guess.
Tapi bila dia non-verbal tu, just let me clear that question. So when they're non-verbal, do they provide you gestures that you can understand what they're going through, or is it still going to be a guessing game?
For some people, for some PMS individuals, yes, but for others, no.
Okay.
So in my daughter, this was actually, I think rezeki juga lah. Before she was born, back to me being in school and all that, one of the things that I used to do was volunteer for the Deaf Society. So basic sign language was something that I picked up because I thought it was a beautiful language. Right?
It is.
So when I first got my daughter, the plan was to teach her baby signs. Not because I knew that she had a rare disease. Masa tu tak tahu apa-apa pun. It was more like, at 6 months you teach E and all that, right? Macam tu lah, just to communicate. Also because I know that people can communicate even without words or even without having to be able to speak, right? She never actually picked it up, but the good part is my other kids picked it up, so they used it as a means to kind of communicate with each other or with her. So that's why I said nothing is lost. There's always hikmah, right?
Of course.
But with her, I think what has happened is, in the last few years and in her growing up, we've understood her rhythm better, right? And we understand her intonation. So she produces sounds, but she doesn't necessarily produces words. And she, because of her hypotonia, she doesn't actually kind of produce gestures either. But I would know which sound means I'm hungry or which sound means, I'm in distress.
Right.
And this is very much similar to, I think, a lot of other families with rare disease. But mine is just the tip of the iceberg lah, compared to others yang macam bolak-balik every minggu kena pergi hospital ambil enzyme replacement therapy and all that. Yang itu lagi bergagah lah parents, right? But a lot of times, because if you have a rare condition that to begin with, there isn't a lot of literature or a lot of information about what to do and what to be done, it's a lot of guesswork, right? So a good day would be when she's happy and everybody else is at home is safe. And, I've come to realize that no matter how stressful work gets, that's just one part of it, right? How we juggle that and everything else too it's almost like a day-to-day. So you would find that there might be days when you have a heavier load at work. So you must have that tandeming process at home, whether it's going to be with your significant other or whether it's going to be external caregiver that you tolong titipkan. So you need to find out what is your rentak and how you manage. For me, what works best is the support groups that I manage, and I am working with other people ni, are also made up of parents. Ada yang parents that have left work, ada yang parents still at work, ada yang parents yang baru nak start kerja. So we kind of lean on each other. I think it's super duper important to continuously find your tribe.
Yes.
Yang itu sangat-sangat penting.
Betul.
Because the reality of it is, in Malaysia, it's almost like if you have anak yang kelainan upaya or kurang upaya, whichever term you want to use, right? If you have a differently abled other, chances are the cost of care and the cost of running a family is exponentially more than anyone else, right? It's not like you were born T20, so you have to be doubly rajin because everything else tends to be either out of pocket if it's not already covered by the government. I'm not saying the government's not covering. I think there's a lot of things that they are helping with. Tapi sebab kita ni di bawah kategori rare, so banyak yang fall through the cracks, yang not actually things yang can be claimed for or are things that are covered for anyway. So for me, I find the parent support groups an extremely important resource. But you have to know how to engage. So for new families, it can also be very overwhelming. You baru nak dapat diagnosis, lepas tu tiba-tiba you dapat people telling you 20 different things that can go wrong in a day. You jadi overwhelmed, right? But you know, the more you go through the process, you know, okay, I'm going to tap out. Today is going to be something day, whatever. For me, what I do is, as a family, kita memang very outdoorsy. So, and you know, I autopilot because my husband also works by and forth abroad, right? So, my system when I was in my previous employer was, I have a box at the back of the car, which has tents and sleeping bags and whatever, what have you, kid, kan? So, when it's Friday, when the weekend hits, it's like, okay, guys, let's draw lots, right? And I try and involve her, even if she doesn't respond to me. By the way, just for clarification, I've got 3 other kids, so in total ada 4 kan? So, dalam kereta tu, kita akan draw lots. Okay, hari ni kita nak pergi bukit ke, sungai ke, laut ke, but it's draw lots, so everybody can just pilih, right? And what we pick,
it's fair.
and what we pick is where we go, right? And this is all definitely prior to COVID. Sebab lepas COVID, we had to be a lot more careful about the public spaces that we went to. But prior to COVID, if we went camping, she would go camping. If we go to the river, she would go to the river. Sekarang, I think what's limiting for her is because we have to be very careful about cross-infection.
Cross-infection.
So we have to be even more careful about the places that we go. So that's why for me, nature is great because orang tak ramai. Less people and more things to do, right?
And it's outdoor, so you're not confined to...
But for families like us, we avoid things like kenduri and malls and all that, mainly because it's a sensory overload for her. So she doesn't enjoy it. And kita pun like, okay, let's go to a place where everybody...
It's a lot for everyone anyways.
Especially Malaysian weddings, right?
Even for the normal people, man, come on, it's a lot. Okay, alhamdulillah. Now, what about resources and support other than that? So you said about all these different family support groups, etc. Tapi where else can people go to find help for any type of rare diseases?
Okay, so for rare diseases dekat Malaysia, alhamdulillah, the general patient journey. Okay, so the first port of call tends to be your doctor. Sebab some rare diseases you will know when you go for your ultrasound. For example, if you have a child with osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bones, or if you have someone with dwarfism, you're carrying a child with dwarfism, dalam scan tu dah nampak kan? Okay, so that means dari awal tu, maybe the doctor, kalau dapat doktor yang cilik, dia akan prep lah. Okay, ibu, this is what you have to be aware of. And then there are those that you find out at birth, right? Masa scan nampak okay, masa lahir je, ya Allah, kulit semua melepuh, or blisters all over the body, and I've got another story to share with you on that. And so that would be bila lahir. And then there are those yang you will know when they start missing their milestones, like how my daughter started kind of like merundum macam tu kan. And then the other is, of course, in adulthood. Now, there are also conditions where rare diseases happen because of illness ataupun environmental factors or situasi keadaan, right? So, for example, one might be a cancer patient and with a tumor growing in, say, the pituitary gland. So, bila you buang tu, tiba-tiba dia dah jadi hypopituitarism sebab dah tak ada functioning tu. Macam tu. So that's why where you hear about rare disease ni mungkin bertukar depending on what was the trigger, what was the spark. So kalau dapat gynae yang cilik, then maybe through the gynecology. But usually it's through the pediatrician, and most of the time it's through the genetic neuro or genetic pediatrician. Selalunya lah, unless you through onco or bila dah jadi adult, or cardiologist if you have a heart condition and they realize actually you don't have a heart condition, you have a rare disease. That's what's building up here. Then from there, we have also in the government hospitals, we have our medical social worker. Who is actually trained on providing not only patient navigation support, but also telling you, Puan, mungkin these are the services that you want to go into. These are the services that you want to check. Right? The sad part about that is, in Malaysia right now, if you are in, say, Likas or Samarhan or somewhere in Borneo, we're not there yet, right? Because a lot of the rare disease when you work, or at least the hospital, Center of Excellence for Government, Ministry of Health, is concentrated in Semenanjung, right? We have one which is under HKL, Hospital Tunku Azizah, which is the Women Children Hospital. And then the other one is Hospital Pulau Pinang, HPP dekat
I
North,
see.
right? But all of these other hospitals are actually macam referral of each other. So, if you are an individual that got the diagnosis abroad, so not everybody dapat diagnosis kat sini, kan?
Betul.
Then what would happen is probably you found the society first before you found the doctor.
Okay.
So what we do is we work very closely with the doctors because dekat Malaysia pun I think genetic counsellor kita ada 14. And the geneticists, pediatric geneticists pun around 11 thereabouts, right? Across the country. So what happens is when they have a new patient, usually we'll get a call. Nadiah, we found XYZ dalam this particular category. Then kita tengok registry kita, okay, right, we have a patient support group for example, osteogenesis imperfecta.
I see.
Okay. But because we have a non-interventionist kind of policy, we give the information to the parents, but we tak paksa the parents to join a support group or society.
Okay.
Usually, it's enough for them to know help is around, ada group ni kalau you nak reach out. Because the first thing that needs to happen is acceptance, right? I have to internalize, this is going to be a lifelong thing. It's not going to be tomorrow suddenly hilang, right?
Betul.
Now, if you found the society first, then they usually say, ada tak doktor yang boleh bantu?
Betul.
Kalau jumpa doktor dulu, dia kata, oh, saya di bawah. Usually it's like that lah, one or the other. I want to touch on this because I think it's important. I often have parents telling me, Nadiah, promise me that my child can speak, that my child will be able to walk.
Right.
When is my child going to die? Or how long is my child going to live?
Right.
And the reality of it, this is very day-to-day human questions.
Yes.
Right? And I always tell all of our patient support leads, it's super important for you to remind them that just because that's your child's condition doesn't mean it's going to be the other person's child's condition. Sebab you satu tu, it's like, that's why kita punya ni is zebra. It's like when you hear hooves, you think it's a horse, but tu keluar zebra. So
I
like,
see.
Surprise! So that's how the zebra started. And also it was because of the Ellis Danlos punya rare disease movement. But the point here is, we always tell, I mean, when the patient groups that I have, especially for PMS kan, I had a family in Thailand, masa tu anak dia baru lahir. Alhamdulillah, doktor dia bagus, diagnose at birth anak dia ada PMS. Dekat, the first time video call, terduduk parents tu dekat the alleyway tu, bercangkung video call dengan I, menangis parents tu, because the dad was saying, I feel like I want to divorce my wife. I don't think I can take this, and this is my first child. I don't think I'm going to be able to care for this kid. What do I do with this kid, right? And then he was like, tell me all about Phelan McDermott, you know, and everything that I asked you earlier. It's a question tu lah. So I said, sir, first and foremost, your wife needs you right now. You know, I think I can appreciate that you're going through a really tough time, but baru sangat lagi anak, baru je keluar means condition lagi kan, kita tak tahu perjalanan dia jauh mana. So I said, pertama sekali, I cannot promise you your child can speak. I cannot tell you your child will walk or run. I cannot tell you how long your child will live because I'm not God. Right? But I can tell you that you will feel anger and frustration and confusion, and there will be blame, and there will be, you know, moments where you're going to be questioning everything. And he was looking at me like, that doesn't sound like good news. I know. I said, wait, I'm getting there. I said, but you will have a community with you because you are not alone.
Betul.
That's number one. Number two, you will find in you love that you never knew existed.
Betul.
You will find hope in the smallest of things. You will find ways to turn your anger into a fuel that you never knew would help you to achieve so much more. And then you duduk down. Okay, now that you're saying it that way, maybe I need to give this kid a chance. and I say, and you need to give yourself a chance to be a dad, right? And they have gone through many journeys. Anak tu memang masuk keluar hospital banyak kali. But beautiful child. Masih in early years. I mean, the kid's about 4 or 5 now, right? But in a lot of these journeys, one thing that I have to say, and I would like to say on your show is, kalau kita selalu cakap kat parents, jangan compare anak kita. Kalau anak kita punya typical, kita kata, kenapa Along straight A, tapi you kurang? Betul. Anak biasa pun kita compare kan? Betul. Rare disease ataupun anak okay, you pun parents compare juga. You know, dia kata, kenapa keluarga Cik XYZ ni, anak dia dah boleh berjalan, anak I tak boleh berjalan lagi. So, kenapa Puan? Firstly, I'm not I cannot answer you why. But secondly, just because the child tak boleh berjalan, is the child breathing? Yes. The child happy? Yes. Is the child able to tell you what the child needs? Yes. You have a lot of things going on there, you know. Because sometimes I think in the process of looking at the things we don't have, we forget to see the things that we do have.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Nadia, this point. It's about, in the context of mental health, and this question is always on the peer.
Yeah.
Okay. Because we're desperate. When do I get better?
Yes.
Then we benchmark other people's recovery with our own.
Yes.
Okay,
And we're taught to do that dari kecil.
Betul.
Aspire higher.
Betul kan? Ini 6 bulan dah baik dah ni. Yang ni 6 tahun, So we start comparing, and that creates a lot of frustration.
Yes.
And that also leads us to losing hope.
Betul.
Sebenarnya. How do I get myself out of this?
Yes.
What am I doing wrong? And then you start questioning yourself, and this is where then you feel like giving up. So di banyak benda, one thing leads to another.
Definitely.
So I think it's such a inspiring story to hear this conversation that you had with this husband or new dad.
Yeah.
And
I think we need to get more dads involved though.
Kan, betul. We need more voices from dads and men, of course. Even in mental health pun sama. Although this is pre-recorded, tapi just for everyone's information, so we know Senator Montian Butan.
Yes.
He just passed, and I just wanted to share his quote, his famous quote. I have given up in giving up. So I think this resonates so much, kan, Nadia, sebenarnya. So we haven't fought the war yet, and we've given up.
Yes.
Betul?
Yes.
So hopefully, through voices like yours, talking to him, and everything that we're doing right now provides a lot of hope. And this is, one of the goals of this podcast, really, to be supporting people, having these conversations, and to create hope. Because there's so much uncertainties, kan?
Yes.
So hope ni kita susah nak nampak. Tapi there's always hope sebenarnya.
Yes.
And it will pass. It will definitely pass.
Yes.
And like you said, new parents, old parents, you can't compare because everyone comes in differently, and benchmarking, that's not the way to go as well. Although I totally understand where they're coming from. Even for me going through, my journey, being in, such desperation, again, we're like, when am I going to get better? And that is a typical question that you ask in the beginning.
Yeah.
Tapi lama tu, then you get it. Okay, now I know. Hikmah dia apa sebenarnya? What is God trying to teach me?
Betul.
It is a journey of humility.
Yes.
Patience.
Yeah.
Dia banyak benda all in all. And hopefully, we become a better person because of this. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, Nadia, for that very insightful sharing. We're going to end segment 2, but we're going to come back shortly.
Okay.
For our last segment, we want to hear about your hopes and maybe aspirations moving forward, inshallah.
Okay.
Inshallah. All right. So thank you, everyone. We'll be right back with Puan Nadiah in Real Conversations with Anita. Thank you, Nadia. It's been very informative. I learned a lot. So I'm sure our listeners, viewers are learning a lot as well. Alhamdulillah. Now, maybe some words of encouragement for those caregivers who are struggling out there, maybe feeling isolated, ataupun feeling overwhelmed. Kan?
Yeah.
You going through this long journey, right? So maybe what would you say to them?
I think a lot of people mean well, and I recently posted this online, things that people say to caregivers because they mean well but doesn't actually do what it's meant to do, right? So for example, maybe I want to focus more on what people say first, and then I'll go to the caregivers balik, because I think it's sort of like a two-in-one thing, right? We often tell people, oh, you're so strong, you've been blessed with a child from heaven, right? Orang selalu kata, oh, anda dikurniakan dengan anak syurga. This anak syurga statement is like a double-edged sword, because most of the time, the presumption is this person believes in heaven and hell. That's one. The other is you're not necessarily helping the situation by telling them that they have someone chosen for Jannah, right? And usually what we tell parents and other people who say these kind of things is we say, look, while we know that we have an individual who has, inshallah destined for heaven, dia masih kat dunia kan, we have to figure out how to give them the best possible life that they have on this earth, so that kita pula tak masuk neraka. We will also maintain that, right? That's number one. Number two, we often like to say things like, tak apalah, nanti sekejap lagi dia baik lah. Kadang-kadang extended family members don't know what to say, right? So when they don't know what to say, they'll say, oh, it's okay, my kid was also like this, not knowing that if a child has a rare condition, chances are whoever your kid is doesn't have that thing, right? We often say things like, oh, sekejap lagi baik lah, or kita doakan cepat sembuh. So there are many things that people say really well-meaning, but the impact of it sometimes is more damaging than we realize.
Minimizes the pain, the struggle.
So what I tell people, like, sometimes when you don't know what to say, don't say anything.
Don't say anything.
Yeah, like just be there, and in your quiet, and in your presence, and even like, for example, if you're close enough, just giving that person a hug, or just holding their hand. No need to say things that will go downhill. If you don't know what to say, you just keep quiet, just hold your hand, just give them a hug. Itu pun dah kira macam so much more, right?
That's so helpful.
Because sometimes it's the presence, and we connect at a different level. So I think what we can perhaps do as caregivers for other caregivers, right? Number one, understand and be mindful of where we're at, because we can't be positive all the time. There are days that we know, okay, I'm at 30% today. If you have a significant other, you can have that conversation, like, where are you at? If you're at 70%, can you cover for me today? Like, I'm maximum I boleh 30% je. Okay. If you have that open conversation, alhamdulillah. If you are blessed with a significant other, doesn't matter who lah. It can actually be your sibling, it can be your parents, it can be your spouse, right? That tandeming is super duper helpful, because it allows you to. It can be as simple as take time out to go and mandi. Take time out to just drive and have an ice cream.
Needs that, Nadia.
Yes, betul, right? And I always tell people that tap to have a time out is not because you have a rare disease. It's because you're human.
Betul.
Right? And it's not because you have anak ni. Betul juga. Tapi you also need to function. Macam kereta kita running empty tank, kena isi minyak, right? That's basically it, right?
Yes.
Now, if you're a single parent, because we have a lot ni sebab bersambit IWD juga, right? So what we have seen is, for a lot of caregivers across the world, when you have a child who's sick, or a child that has a lot of complicated medical needs or differently able, sadly, in Malaysia and in many parts of the world, if the family unit disintegrates, the mother will be the main caregiver and the main care provider and the main breadwinner. So it's like a 3-4 kali lipat ganda lah, right? I'm not saying that women are all nurturing, tak, but it's just, I guess, it's a mixture of societal conformities, a mixture of just how things are done, and in communitarian kind of societies, it's even more prevalent lah than those yang memang, it's okay, I'm never planning to get married, tapi ada 3 anak angkat, and anak angkat semua okay, mungkin, right? So, if you have no one else, right? This is where I think it's super important for you to also learn to tap out and to figure out what would be useful and life-saving for you. And the reason why I'm saying is because masa COVID, we've actually lost family members who said, they quietly suffered and they were not able to go out to say, look, I really need help, right? And so because of that, I can no longer function, I can no longer care for my child, and I can no longer support the family that I want to. Therefore, I decide to take my own life. Example, ada yang decide to take their own life. I have a case in point, family dekat, bukan kat Malaysia lah, but that happened. I also had a family member who told me in Malaysia that said, at one point I was actually considering taking my life and taking my children's life along with me, because the idea was to end suffering sama-sama. Now,
and who would take care of the children if...
Correct. Caregivers yang single ataupun caregivers yang tak ada extra support selalu akan fikir, siapa yang akan menjaga anak saya? So it's not, so don't demonize that, because the point is they wouldn't have gotten that if they felt that they were supported. It's to your point, it's out of desperation, but even in that desperation there is love. Dia tengah fikir macam mana nak selamatkan anak dia dulu. And cuma cara dia fikir nak selamatkan anak dia tu is through ending the life. It's just cuma the ending result dia lain, right? Another family that I had, which I think was a clever thing that the lady did, and this unfortunately is not Malaysia, this is one of the countries that I supported. She was a single mother, she had a child with PMS, but she knew she was no longer able to care for the child, so she was basically a parent in distress.
Right.
So she actually, under their KPWKM, they have this thing called parent in distress punya support talian lah, right? So basically their version of JKM came, took the child, and the child was not placed in a rumah kebajikan, was placed in macam a community home where the child's actually living in a housing area with other people of similar impediments, but not the same rare disease condition. Sebab benda tu dah rare kan, jadi mungkin dia masuklah dengan adult autism ke, adult dengan ADHD ke, or other things combined. The child's now thriving, alhamdulillah, because she said, as much as I love my child, I realized that I can no longer give the best care to my child. And in fact, if I have my child with me, my child's actually going to be more at risk than with me. But I thought that was an extremely big decision and very courageous of her. I mean, having courage doesn't mean you don't have fears, right? Like a million and one fears at the same time. But realizing, okay, if I don't, my child's at risk and I'm at risk too. So she now sees her child anytime she wants. The child doesn't live very far, but the child has a nurse there, the child has a doctor and a therapist there that helps to run independent living center lah, macam ILP ni kan thing.
Right.
And the mother then holds the job to make sure that she's able to care because she's a single parent.
Right.
That I think is something that we need to focus on in countries like ours because sebenarnya bukan tak boleh. We have groups right now that are looking at independent living. But a lot of it is focused on independent living for persons with disability that are high functioning or independent themselves.
Betul.
Me, I'm asking for yang tak independent.
Yeah. Betul. I think it's so interesting, Nadia, when you bring this up because there's so many elements to what you just said. I think societal pressure. I think that's huge sebenarnya. And recently kita banyak dengar pasal parents tinggal anak in the car or shopping malls,
We had
etc.
one case recently kat Subang. Met.
And knowing netizens blaming and saying all sorts of different things, but the key word here, Nadia, is support.
Yes.
That is what is lacking sebenarnya.
Yeah.
Can you imagine like what you just said? It's like a triple whammy tadi kan. Because you're a single parent and then your child pula has a rare disease or disability or whatever, and then you're also the breadwinner. Who do you leave your child with when you need to fight for your own living livelihood?
Correct.
So there's a lot of things and there's a lot of gaps here, right here. And also when you said about ending one's life or ending your life and your children's life.
Yeah.
Apa yang kita tak nampak sebenarnya dekat sini, our role as the society, apa yang kita dah buat sebenarnya to lead to that person having that option, that only option is dying.
Yeah. Betul.
It's sad kan sebenarnya. So I think it's a lot of insights right here for all of us to really realize there's so much work to be done.
Yeah.
And kita as an individual sebenarnya, we can do a lot.
Betul. And it doesn't have to be expensive to do stuff.
Betul. And individuals, and then imagine individuals combining all our efforts and everything kan.
Yes.
It's massive sebenarnya.
Yes.
Tapi we always position ourselves, wanita, I don't know, I don't understand. Without us realizing.
What can I do?
What can I do
Yeah.
kan. Padahal we just need to be a human with empathy like what you said kan. And having or investing a little bit of time.
Yes.
Kan, a little bit of our space. Allowing, even enabling conversations such as this. It's so helpful, like what you said.
The conversation, I think I have to say, we often minimize the importance of having conversations.
Betul.
Right? So during the pandemic, we had this thing with MRDS, which we called High Community RD.
Okay.
And the purpose was really having 10 different Zoom chats with 16 different RD conditions, and we clustered them based on kind of like their challenges, because then senang sikit nak have the conversation, right, the discussion. And rata-rata we had people writing back to us to say, that was life-saving. Because I was going nuts, right? I was trying to figure out. Then when I heard this mother who was actually in this part of Malaysia and I'm in this part of Malaysia, and I'm listening, hey, I have a sister who's going through the same thing, or I have a dad who's also struggling, or he also lost his job during the pandemic, So people kind of banded together, and then they realized, okay. Together, it's not too unbearable. It's still hard. I'm not going to say it's going to become easy, right? But the point is, if kita tak boleh cari kejiranan di luar, kita cari kejiranan antara kita. And my point is, in 2024, we live so much of our lives online, right? Which is fine. That's the way the world is going. But I really believe we need to bring back the kejiranan in person.
Yes,
sangat penting.
Betul.
Because we have families living in PPR that don't even know the names of their neighbours, right? Or if anything were to happen in one household, you hanya dengar tiap-tiap hari bergaduh dengan piring periuk semua campak pecah. Kita tak buat apa-apa.
Tu jangan jaga tepikan orang.
Yes.
Right.
So the one thing that Malaysia has as a culture, which I think kita kena ubah lah, tweak sikit lah, right? Jangan jaga tepikan orang tu does not mean you know this. Your hunch says this person is in distress.
Betul.
Apalah salahnya, kita nak masuk Ramadan ni kan? Like ding dong the bell and ask, hey, do you need anything? Are you okay? The worst thing that can happen to you is your neighbor saying, stop meddling in my business.
Right. No, I don't need help.
At least dia tahu that you care, But if you leave it in the quiet, we will start seeing things that are happening in other countries as well, where people quietly dying in their homes, and then only the ambulance and the mortuary will come pick people up because tak dengar apa-apa, tiba-tiba dah padam. Right? So I think it's very important. The kejiranan tu kita kena bawa balik.
Which is happening right now, Nadia.
Yes.
We need that a lot
Definitely.
right now.
InsyaAllah, semoga kita teruskan.
Betul, teruskan. Okay, I think I only have one last question for you. It's been wonderful talking to you. I think it's a lot that we've learned today. So thank you so much, and please keep it up. Whatever that you're doing, we wish you kita doakan. Inshallah, amin. Doakan yang terbaik. Okay, so maybe last words from you. What do you envision for Malaysia? Not necessarily just for PMS and rare disease, but really for the disability space as a whole.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole host of things that we need to do. Number one, we have a lot of good work that's happening in the country.
We do.
What we need to do is connect the dots.
Yes,
So sekarang ni, what I'm seeing is we have a lot of great work, a lot of learned individuals, a lot of good organizations. Tapi sometimes kita tend to be proprietary. So instead of working together, we tend to end up working in silos. And silos ni actually menyebabkan kerja jadi lagi banyak kerja daripada lagi senang, right? So one, definitely my hope is we need to connect the dots.
Okay.
Right? And this goes all the way to the policymakers. I'm not afraid to say this. I've said this many times. I said just because we have a new, administration coming doesn't mean things of the past kena. Like everyone that comes in brings their own thing.
Right.
I think benda yang bagus kita continue. Or kita upgrade. Okay, benda yang tak bagus then we put aside, right? So the connecting the dots need to definitely work. And this definitely goes from what are the legal policy, institutional structures that need to be in place to safeguard Malaysia as a dynamic and healthy society. But kita tak boleh rata-rata just blame and assume kerajaan is going to help everything, because the point is they're not going to be able to do that, right? So we need every layer. Now at the very bottom layer yang berdepan dengan keluarga dan community ni, even for us, alhamdulillah, I think the last 2-3 years or so, we're seeing more unification, more cohesion, and more coming together, because we all realize that kalau satu mungkin rare, you combine 7,000, you're not rare.
Betul.
Do you know, I want to end with this fact that combined total there are 300 million plus people living with rare disease in the world. That being the case, we're actually the third largest country in the world.
Betul.
We're not rare,
Right.
right? Kalau nak ikut daripada population size, right? But because we are like peppers all across,
Betul.
macam bintang di langit lah, semua tak connect, right? So we need to work like a constellation. So if we can connect all these different things, baru kita nampak pattern. Bila nampak pattern, tu nak menggerakkan
Lebih mudah. Betul.
Itu dari segi structure. Number 2, I'm happy to share we have this campaign that MRDS is doing right now.
Okay.
And it's tackling stigma straight up, right? So the campaign, simply put, don't just stare, say hello. Okay.
Oh, I like that. Don't just stare, just
Say
say
hello.
hello.
Yeah.
Say hello.
Yeah, don't just stare, say hello. Mainly because kita tak nak jaga tepikan orang, tapi kita macam, oh my god, kenapa dia macam, we still have this gawking thing that we tend to do, right? And we have a lot of parents complaining that I bawa pram, anak I mungkin kulit semua mengelupas, or my child's on a wheelchair, or I'm struggling and I'm blind. Kita tak, as masyarakat, we don't know, do I help, do I not help? It's like an awkward situation of just staring. Or, in my own situation, I've heard people say, nak makan pun tak senang, bising sangat, the people who give comments like that, right?
Betul.
So, instead of just staring, come and say hello lah. And if you can help, better still, right? Don't assume that person needs help, of course. Like for example, if the person is with a walking stick and blind, don't just jalan pegang grab tangan orang tu. That's like invasion of privacy.
Betul.
But you can come by and say, sir, do you want help? Can I help you cross wherever? The point is, the same way you speak to other people, right? So the campaign is #don't just stare, say hello.
It started? The campaign
Yes,
started?
it started prior to the World Rare Disease Day. We have had contributions from different countries as well.
Okay.
And the nice thing is, even YB Adam Adli, who's the Deputy Minister, made a video on it as well.
I saw that one.
Yeah, so really, really grateful that he's getting on board. The point is, instead of just gawking, kalau tak tahu, tanyalah. It's okay. Because chances are, people are very happy to talk about it rather than you staring, then they feel that they're judged.
Betul.
Right? And the third is, there is help. If you are an individual living with rare disease, there are other individuals out there who may have the same condition as you, or even if you're the lone unicorn in the sea of zebras, right? You'd still be able to find friends who would understand what it means to want to be accepted in society, to have friends at work, to be able to find love, so benda macam tu. Nombor satu, you're not alone. If you are a parent and you're struggling, there is help available, irrespective of which state you are in, right? If you want to speak to someone who is in your same space, same patient group type, right? You can contact MRDS. if you want to speak, nothing to do with rare disease, in fact, and you want to speak to potentially a counselor or a trauma counselor, or even if you're suicidal, you can actually call MIASA, right? The point is you don't have to call MRDS, it can be anyone, right?
Right.
And right now, MRDS is actually the administrator of over 30 different patient support groups.
Oh, subhanallah.
Plus, we have 16 registered NGOs with us and approximately 25 other PAGs that are kecil, jadi dia tak boleh jadi
Betul?
NGO yet,
NGO by itself.
right?
Yep.
So there are people who will be your tribe. So anda tidak keseorangan.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much, Puan Nadiah Hanim Abdul Latif, for being with us, the president of the Rare Disease Society, Malaysian Rare Disease Society. Thank you so much. So the campaign is hashtag Don't Just Stare, Say Hello, and there is definitely help and support out there. We just need to look for it. Thank you very much, Nadia, for being with us. We truly appreciate it. All right. This is it, folks, with Puan Nadiah Hanim Abdul Latif. Alhamdulillah, very happy to have this conversation with a conversation on rare diseases from the lens of a caregiver and advocate. We hope you found it beneficial and meaningful. I definitely did. Now, for those of you who are struggling, or maybe your loved ones are, you can reach us at 1-800-1800-66 is MIASA Malaysia's 24/7 crisis helpline. Take care, everyone, and please take care of each other.
This is Real Conversations with Anita, a mental health podcast brought to you by Iltizam by Equinus and MIASA Malaysia.